Okay. Yeah, so it is a great pleasure to have you all here for the new session of the UCL InfoSec Research Seminar. And yeah, it's my great pleasure to welcome Alin Tomescu today for this session. And Alin is currently a researcher at VMware Research in the Bay Area. Postdoctoral researcher, okay, at VMware Research. And before he did a PhD at MIT, and he's been working on many interesting things in applied cryptography, from PKI, blockchain research, threshold cryptography, and so forth. And today he will talk about his latest work on authenticated data structures. And I'm really looking forward to the presentation. So Alin, the floor is yours. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Philip, for the introduction and for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. So I'll be talking about several of our works on authenticated data structures that focus on stateless validation for cryptocurrency transactions and on transparency logging. And I want to say this is joint work with a lot of folks. Some of them were my high school students that I mentored at MIT. Some of them are professors from other universities. Some of them are MIT lab mates, and some of them are the VMware researchers and the Ethereum Foundation team. And its work spread over a couple of papers, the latest one being currently in submission. And so when I tried thinking about what kind of talk I wanted to give, I didn't want to go into a lot of technical details about all of these different constructions in the papers, because there's actually already a lot of talks by me that do that, and you can find those online, and I'll give you links for it. And instead, I want to take a broader approach and generally convince you that Merkle hash trees, which we're all hopefully familiar with, cannot do some things efficiently. So things like having some succinct proofs, things like updating proofs and digests, things like proof aggregation. And these are actually things we need in many applications. So some of these applications are starting to emerge, like transparency logs, which is used nowadays for securing your web browsing, and stateless validation, which is basically the plan for the next generation of Ethereum. And we can get these things with new techniques. For example, things like polynomial commitments and things like hidden order groups, so RSA groups. And I think an exciting future lies ahead, because although we're starting to see a lot of cool constructions from these techniques, they're imperfect in many ways, and there's a lot of opportunity for interesting work. And again, the constructions I'll be presenting in this work, so all of these acronyms here that don't mean anything right now, already have in-depth presentations, and you can go to my website here. The slides hopefully will be made available, and click on these links, and you can see really in-depth presentations on each individual construction. So for the rest of the talk, I'll take a more broader approach. And the outline of the talk is, first, I'm going to talk about transparency logs and the authenticated data structures needs there, and how Merkle trees are not sufficient. Then I'll move to stateless validation for payments only. So imagine Ethereum without smart contracts. And then I'll move, if there's time, to stateless validation for smart contracts, which covers our latest work on authenticated dictionaries from RSA assumptions. Okay, so let's begin with transparency logs and succinctness. So I'm going to start by motivating the problem. As many of you know, websites on the internet need to have a public key that users can encrypt data to for that website. And the way this works on the internet is a website owner, like Facebook.com's owner, say Mark Zuckerberg, goes to a CA and he says, hey, CA, this is my public key. I own Facebook.com. Please sign a certificate that says Facebook.com has this public key. The CA verifies that this is really Mark Zuckerberg and he really owns Facebook.com, and if so, gives him the certificate. And now when Alice accesses the website, Alice gets the certificate from the website, verifies the signature on it from the CA, extracts the public key from the certificate, and if all is good, in the sense that the signature verifies on the certificate, she can encrypt her password to the website and be certain that she's encrypting the password to Mark Zuckerberg and not some other shady dude, okay? So this is great in theory, but in practice, what happens is the certificate authority can get compromised And an attacker can set up a fake Facebook.com, potentially by messing with the DNS system. And he can give himself a fake certificate for Facebook. By the way, can people see my cursor if I do this?
Yeah, yeah,
good. And can get himself a fake certificate for Facebook.com. And when the attacker gives this fake certificate to Alice, Alice checks the signature on it, the signature checks out, and because Alice trusts that the CA is honest and not compromised, she will encrypt her password to this public key, which is actually the attacker's public key, and now Alice's password was stolen. And really the problem here is that the trust model was broken. So in the HTTPS trust model, the assumption is that the CA is always honest and never compromised, but that's clearly not the case. There's been a lot of CA breaks in the past. And the other problem with this is that if an attacker pulls off this attack, he can do so surreptitiously. So it's very hard to detect. The attacker can just individually target Alice, pull off the attack, and then the real Facebook.com will never find out they were impersonated by the attacker. And in 2013 or so, Google proposed a system not to prevent these attacks, because by definition, they're impossible to prevent, but to detect such attacks and hopefully deter them by basically eliminating malicious CAs from the ecosystem. So really, this certificate transparency property system just aims to detect these attacks. And let me show you how that works. The idea is that, as before, Facebook gets a certificate from the CA, but this time there's a requirement that for that certificate to be valid, it's not sufficient to just have a signature from the CA on it. It also has to be published in this so-called transparency log. And this requirement is enforced at the user level. So when a client goes to facebook.com and gets the certificate, they not only check the signature, they also check that the certificate is in the log via a inclusion proof. And this log is really just an authenticated data structure. It's a dictionary, actually, that maps a domain to its set of certificates over time. And the user has a digest of this authenticated data structure and can verify a proof with respect to that digest that the certificate is in the log. And what we get with certificate transparency is that, like I said before, attacks are not prevented, in the sense that if I corrupt the CA, I can issue myself a fake certificate as before, I can give it to Alice, and I can even put it in the log, and Alice will see that it's in the log via the inclusion proof, will accept it and give me the fake, and give me her password, and I'll pull off my attack. But the good news is that Facebook will find out about the attack when it happened, and the CA could be eliminated from the ecosystem via the real world, like let's say you take some legal action. Whereas in the previous world, detecting such attacks was much more difficult. And how can Facebook do so? Well, the idea is that Facebook will just monitor, and this is a keyword that we'll use throughout the talk, Facebook will monitor the log for its own certificates. It'll send a lookup query asking, hey, what are my certificates? And the log will say, hey, C and C prime are your certificates, and it'll prove this lookup. So this is a so-called lookup proof. It'll prove that these are all of the certificates for Facebook and nothing has been left out. And when Facebook notices the C prime, Facebook can whistleblow and say, hey, I've been impersonated. Here's a certificate C prime that I've never asked for, and this CA issued it for me, and this is really bad. So now we have a hope of detecting these attacks, but for this to actually work, these logs have to have two key properties. And roughly speaking, these properties define transparency. And they mean, the idea is that what you want is once a certificate is in the log, it should stay there forever, because if I'm a malicious CA, I can put a fake C prime in, and the attacker gives it to Alice, and then I collude with the log and remove the C prime by the time Facebook checks it, right? So it has to, the C prime, any certificate has to stay there forever in the log. And that's roughly speaking an append-only property of the log that must be maintained. And two, the certificates should be efficiently discoverable. So in other words, Facebook should be able to monitor the logs efficiently by sending a query and getting a response with a short proof. Because the alternative would be for Facebook and all of the other websites on the web to download every new entry appended to the log to see if they've been impersonated, which is just not very efficient from a communication perspective. And transparency logs actually have a bunch of other applications. So you can use them for securing messaging like WhatsApp or Signal, because there you have a public key distribution problem as well. You can use them to secure software distribution by basically keeping a log of all software binaries to prevent tampering with the binaries. And you can use them for certificate revocation. And I want to say, maybe you can use them for government too. It's not like we don't need transparency in our government. So I want to stop briefly and make sure this makes sense if there are any questions.
Yeah. Anybody having any questions?
And also to take a sip of my coffee. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about how these things are implemented in practice. So the first transparency law construction, and actually the thing that's deployed out there right now, is called certificate transparency. It's a really amazing system that's done a lot of good for the web. And the way certificate transparency works is it uses a Merkle hash tree where you append the certificate to the tree by adding new leaves to the tree in a left to right fashion. So you get this tree that has leaves in chronological order. And as a result, because they're in chronological order, it turns out that allows you to easily prove the append-only property holds. Because if you have an older version of the tree and a newer version of the tree, there's really an easy way to relate one with the other via a simple Merkle proof. But because they're chronologically ordered, that means there's no efficient way of doing lookups, because if I want to convince you that I haven't left out a certificate in any one of these chronologically ordered leaves, what can I do? They're not sorted in any way. I have to give you every leaf to really convince you. So the lookup proof is very big. And other systems, what they do is they sort the tree in some way. So they might build a binary search tree sorted by the domain name that maps each domain name to their public keys, sort of like in a unique place in the tree. Or they might build a prefix tree, and that allows them to prove lookups in logarithmic space. So the proof is very small, but because the tree is now lexicographically ordered rather than chronologically ordered, when the tree grows over time, too many things change, roughly speaking, in the tree that the append-only proof has to reason about. And as a result, the append-only proof increases to linear size. Now, I know these are just informal descriptions of what happens, and I'm happy to discuss more in detail at the end of the talk or now if you have questions. But I just want to say that this is a really interesting open problem. Can we do this with Merkle hash trees only and get both of these proofs to be log-in? And so far, I don't know how to do it. Maybe other people can figure it out. It would be really nice. And instead, what we did is we said bye-bye to Merkle hash trees, and we looked at something called bilinear accumulators. And we used bilinear accumulators to build a new authenticated data structure that has polylogarithmic proof sizes. And it pays for this with a higher append time. And it also pays for this in terms of a trusted setup that must generate these public parameters, and you ideally would like to distribute via MPC protocol, so it's not actually trusted. And it also pays for it in terms of cryptographic assumptions. It uses assumptions that are used in SNARK systems. And we call our construction an append-only authenticated dictionary in the sense that it supports both of these operations efficiently. And then we make this construction more asymptotically efficient. We reduce this lookup proof size to log n by switching from bilinear accumulators to RSA accumulators. But that further increases the append time, both asymptotically and concretely. It does have the advantage that the public parameters are now constant. And as an assumption, it still uses a non-falsifiable strong assumption, the generic group model. And that basically summarizes our results. And next, I want to tell you about how we build this AAD primitive from accumulators, either bilinear or RSA. And here I want to highlight that really the biggest problem with our two constructions is the slow append time. And I'll show you later how slow it is and how we can fix it. And then this is really an exciting avenue for future work. And we have lots of ideas for how to fix this. And I think it's totally in the realm of possibility. Okay, so I'm actually going to describe just a static data structure in the sense that I have my dictionary, I have my certificates associated with their domain names, and I want to build a single log authenticated data structure. And I'm not going to describe to you how this data structure grows over time, how I add new things to it, but I'll just roughly tell you how that would work too. So let's begin with a static data structure and how that works. So suppose I have a dictionary or a log. So the keys are yellow and the values are green, and a key can have multiple values, like facebook.com might have certificate 1 and certificate 2, for example, right? How do I go from here? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to build a tree in the following fashion. I'm going to hash each key into a path using a hash function. So let's say I take key A and it hashes the 0, 0, and that determines a path here. Key B hashes the 0, 1, that determines a path here. Key C hashes the 1, 1, and so on. And then I'm also going to hash the values, and I'm going to extend down from their key's path into the tree. So VA hashes the 0, 1, and I extend the path down. A's path with VA. So notice that unlike previous Merkle constructions, I'm not actually storing the value VA in the leaf here. I'm just storing it implicitly in the path. I'm encoding it, just like I'm encoding the key in the path. And this is really a toy example. I'm just using 2 bits for the hash function. So the security parameter lambda is 1 here. It's not a very secure construction, but it's just sort of to keep the slide manageable. And this way, I can basically non-ambiguously encode a dictionary into a tree, assuming no collisions in the hash function. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to number the nodes in the tree in a canonical fashion. So the root is 1, its child is 2 and 3. The children of 2 are 4 and 5, of 3 are 6 and 7, and so on. This is the typical way you might number a tree with numbers. And the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to define this notion of a frontier, or roughly speaking, the edge of the tree. And what is a node in this frontier, or a frontier node? Well, a frontier node is just a node that's not in the tree, but has a parent in the tree, right? So 20, 10, 9, 4, and so on. And notice that I'm not putting frontier nodes beneath these guys, because these guys are at the bottom level of the tree. So there's no need for frontier nodes. And I'm going to use these frontier nodes to prove non-membership of keys and to prove that I've returned all values for a key. In the sense that, for example, imagine there was a key D that hashed to this path. The way I'm going to prove to you that key D is not in is by showing you that where a node for key D was supposed to be, there's no node there, there's a frontier node. Similarly, if I want to prove to you that all of the values of key C are just the value VC and there's no other value, I'll have to show you frontier nodes 11 and 20, where the other values would have had to be for the key C. And the next step is, now I have this tree and it's numbered in a canonical fashion, I can take these nodes in the tree, which are numbered, and put them into a set, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, and so on. These are all of the nodes in the tree. And let's call the set P, roughly speaking, these are the prefixes of the keys, if you think of this as a prefix tree. And then I'm also going to build another set over the frontier nodes, and 6, 11, 9, 16, 20. And now I'm going to observe that these 2 sets have to be disjoint by definition, because the frontier is just nodes that are not in the tree but have parents in the tree. And then what I will do is I will commit to these 2 sets using cryptographic accumulators. And what a cryptographic accumulator is just a scheme for committing to a set. Like, for example, a Merkle hash tree is a cryptographic accumulator because it can commit to a set. But I'm not going to use a Merkle hash tree. I'm going to use accumulators that are a bit more sophisticated in the sense that they support disjointness proofs that are small, and they support subset proofs that are small. What does this mean? If I have 2 sets A and B, and I have their accumulators, then I can construct, if A is a subset of B, I can construct a proof that verifies with respect to their commitments that the 2 committed sets are subset. I can do the same for disjointness. So I'm going to commit to P and I'm going to commit to F, and then I'm going to build a disjointness proof that they're disjoint using the accumulator scheme. And for proving inclusion of a certificate in the log or of a key value pair in the dictionary, what I will do is I'll leverage the subset proof. So in order to prove, let's say that one of the values of key B is VB, all I need to convince you is that 1, 3, 7, 15, 31 are a subset of the accumulator of P, right? And similarly, to convince you that, let's say, key D is not in, I have to convince you that 6 is a subset of F, so that means 6 is in the frontier node. And same for completeness. If I want to convince you that when you've done a lookup proof for key C, VC is the only value of that key, then I need to convince you that 11 and 20 are a subset of the frontier. And I can do that using the disjointness proofs of the accumulators. And there's 2 constructions we can use for this. One is called the bilinear accumulator. So this commits to a set by representing the set as a polynomial. The polynomial has roots at every element in the set. We won't go into details about how that works too much. And the other scheme is an RSA accumulator, which represents the set by hashing each element in the set and taking the product of all of these hashes and raising G to it. So our scheme has to use the same type of accumulator for both of these things, just to clarify. But we can define two different schemes depending on which accumulator choice we make. And that's what I showed you earlier in the table. And now we have lookup proofs. It's basically just subset proofs with respect to P and F. And I haven't defined append-only proofs. So suppose I have two of these prefix trees. How do I prove the append-only property holds between them? Well, you can easily note that if I've only added new key value pairs to the tree, then I'm only adding nodes to the set P. So in order to prove that the append-only property holds, all I need to prove is that the set P for the first tree is a subset of the set P for the second tree. And I can do that using this subset proof right here. And for the frontier, even though the frontier will change in a very complicated way as you add new things in the tree, you actually don't need to prove anything about it. All you need to prove is that the frontier in the new tree is disjoint from the prefixes in the new tree. And as long as you can do that, you can never sort of create fake proofs about a key having two different inconsistent values. So that's roughly the overview of the construction. What remains is appending to this dictionary. So far I've described the static dictionary. I also haven't described how fast you can compute such inclusion proofs, such lookup proofs, append-only proofs, and all of that is handled by this de-amortization technique, which roughly speaking takes the static data structure and changes it into something that supports appends efficiently and pre-computes all of these lookup proofs efficiently and all of these append-only proofs efficiently for any version I and J of the tree. And this is something that you can see in our other talks in detail that I go over. You can also read our papers or see our slides. It's actually a very interesting algorithm. It's a generic black box algorithm that is applied to any data structure. So it's very interesting on its own. Okay, so now we have this construction. How does it perform in practice? Well, so append-only proofs between any version I and J of the tree are roughly 7 kilobytes when the size of the dictionary is 1 million. And lookup proofs are around 40 and 120 kilobytes. So as an idea, a Merkle proof, if you did a lookup in a Merkle prefix tree, you would get a lookup proof of 1 kilobyte. So our lookup proofs are much, much bigger. There are many things we can do to decrease this. New techniques have emerged since we wrote this paper that can decrease the lookup proof size. Nonetheless, despite this higher lookup proofs, we can reduce communication and certificate transparency anywhere from 10x to 100x, even 1000x. It really depends on how often websites monitor their public keys in the log. That depends how much faster than CT we are, because our communication is made worse if you monitor more frequently. But even if you monitor something like 30 times a day, you could get a 1000x reduction in communication. And we do some back of the envelope calculations in our paper about how this works, if you're curious about that. Now,
question.
In terms of
yes. So what are the, what makes these lookup proofs so large? Can you say a few words about this?
Yeah, I can. Let me. I think I can do so with this slide. So when I prove lookups, remember this is really a toy example. So the paths in the real tree are 256 bits long. So for example, the path for the key. That means that if a key has one value, I will have 256 frontier nodes along the path to that one value of the key that I'm going to need to prove are in the frontier. And those frontier proofs, we actually give individual proofs, and they're not constant size proofs. They're actually logarithmic size proofs for each frontier node. And that's actually the main source of the overhead for the proof.
Okay.
But since we wrote our paper, there are techniques for sort of computing all of these frontier proofs in one go, and they can be all constant size, and you can even aggregate them. So I think we could get like a significant reduction in lookup proof size as a result. But yeah, that's a really great question, and it doesn't really, just to make it clear, I didn't really clarify how that works. So yeah, it was a good question, and it's not obvious. Okay, so in terms of append times, our append times are a bit horrific. So 1 append per second if we use batching properly. So That's not, I wasn't very happy with that when I implemented this. And also, to make matters worse, this is amortized time. So that means that some appends take hours while others take 1 millisecond, right? So we have an amortized construction in our implementation. This can be de-amortized and turned into worst case append time. So for worst case append time, maybe we have a little bit of overhead and we can get, I don't know, less than 1 append per second. But in principle, we could get rid of the amortized time. We just haven't explored that on the implementation side. And CT actually needs something like 53 appends per second. So now the question is, can we get there? Can we get to that rate with future work? And we have a bunch of ideas for how to do that.
There is one question by Siamak.
Hi, sorry.
Hello.
Prove anything about the sort of the size of the, or at least the, the original size of the accumulator, that it is empty to begin with, or something like that?
Let me make sure I understand the question. So you're asking, do I prove anything about the original accumulator if it's empty?
Yeah, the tree that you showed. Don't we need to prove that, or it's sort of, we are starting from an empty state or something?
Yeah, so initially the log is empty, I think is what you're trying to say, right? And when the log is empty, the sets P and F, well, P is the empty set when the log is empty. Let's agree on that, right? So now if I've added some new things to the log, P is empty and P prime will have the nodes for the things I've added to the log, right? And now if I want to do an append only proof between the empty log and the log I've appended some things to, that's trivial because P is a subset of P prime, and I can commit to P and P prime. I can even commit to the empty set, and I can build that proof.
Sure, yes. Okay, maybe I should ask my question another way. So if you consider, a sort of traditional blockchain, part of the security comes from the fact that everyone can see how many things are there. Like the person who is storing or managing the blockchain is not just adding things, is not doing sort of the equivalent stuffing, if I'm using the right.
It's not doing what?
I'm not adding sort of new things without other people seeing. But for example, the accumulator is going to be just one.
Yes.
It's not going to show the size of how many certificates.
Yes, good. Right, so now that touches really upon the application itself. So this is a different application than blockchain. So if you think about Alice and Facebook.com interacting with this append-only log that we're trying to build, from Facebook.com's perspective, Facebook.com doesn't care how many new certificates have been added to the log.
Got it.
All it cares is that the log stays append-only. Similarly, Alice doesn't care either. She's just trying to audit the log and make sure it stays append-only. So, okay, sounds like that answered your question. Okay,
thanks.
All right, and thank you for the question, by the way. So, okay, these append times are less than ideal, but I think there's a lot of hope here. There's many things we can do and a lot of exciting avenues for future work. So one thing we can do is we can decrease the tree size. So I said that I have one path that encodes the key, it has 2 lambda bits. The other path that encodes the value has another 2 lambda bits. So I have 4 lambda height, but I can go from 4 lambda to 2 lambda by carefully only encoding the keys in the tree and encoding the values in some other place in our amortization strategy, which, it's not obvious how that works from what I've just said, but we discuss more in our I think I discussed more about this in my PhD thesis, actually. And then another thing we can do is actually go lower from 2 lambda to log n, which is what a Merkle prefix tree would have as its height. And again, this is something I discuss in my thesis in detail. And if we are able to reduce the tree height, this also has the advantage of reducing the number of public parameters that have to be generated in the trusted setup, which is not a great property of our scheme. But again, if you use RSA accumulators, then these public parameters go away. And one thing we can do, which is, Philip, kind of what I mentioned earlier when I answered your question, is we can find a way of pre-computing proofs faster for these nodes in the tree, these subset proofs with respect to the accumulator. And we have our own technique for doing that. And there's a newer technique that does that too. And I'll touch upon these two techniques later in the talk. And finally, we have a new construction from RSA assumptions, not from RSA accumulator, that gives us an AED in our newest paper, and I'll touch upon it later as well. So perhaps this construction can be de-amortized and made faster. It does seem to have other advantages compared to our RSA accumulator construction. And it also reduces the number of public parameters. So overall, I'm confident that it's within the realm of possibility to get a 50x improvement in a pen speed for our construction. Now, to conclude this part of the talk, I was trying to convince you that Merkle hash trees have either order n lookup proofs or order n append only proofs. They don't have order log n for both. And we need order log n for both in transparency logs if we want to build transparency logs that are communication efficient and don't rely on trusted third parties to help Facebook.com monitor the log. AADs have order log n lookup and append only proofs, but they're inefficient in practice, and we have to improve them with future work in terms of append times and also proof sizes. And I also leave you with a link to our GitHub repo, where we implement our amortized AAD in C++. And this gets me to my second part of the talk, which is about stateless validation. And here I want to clarify that stateless is really an unfortunate terminology, because it's not like you're validating transactions without having any ground truth. You do have some ground truth. You do have the state, but it's compressed into a digest. And that's what folks call stateless validation. So just keep in mind, stateless validation means validating against a succinct 32-byte digest rather than 100 gigabytes of account state in Ethereum, let's say, right? And for stateless validation, we need authenticated data structures that support proof updates and proof aggregation efficiently. And this concept was talked a lot as early as 2011 in the Bitcoin community on the forums. I think you can find some references about that in the CPZ 18 paper. But in the academic literature, it was first explored by Raisin et al. And by Chepornoy et al. For payments-only cryptocurrencies, so no smart contracts. And let me tell you what the idea is, roughly speaking. So in a cryptocurrency like Ethereum that uses stateful validation, each miner stores the full state, and to simplify, the state can be thought of as a vector that maps each user I to their balance of $30, let's say, and their public key PKI, right? And that basically summarizes Ethereum for payments only. You have a vector, user I is mapped to their balance and their public key in the vector. And when the miner gets a transaction, say from user one sending $5 to user two, what that miner does is it first checks, hey, does user one have more than $5? Well, yes, it does. Great, let me update the state and subtract 5 from 1 and add 5 to 2. And now I have some new state. I can validate transactions. But the price I pay for this is I have to store all of this big data. In stateless validation, what folks proposed said, well, this is a vector. Why don't we commit to it using a vector commitment scheme? So for example, a Merkle hash tree over n leaves is a vector commitment scheme of that data. So we could commit to this using a VC scheme, and we get a succinct digest, like 32 bytes. And then we also get proofs for every position in this vector. And if each user I stores their balance and their public key and their proof by I, then we fully distributed the state amongst all users. And the miner only has to store this 32-byte digest thing. And then when the miner gets a transaction, we now augment it to some extent. So we say we include the full balance of user one who's sending money to user two. And we include a proof of that full balance for user one. So when user one creates this transaction, he puts his balance there and puts a proof that this is the correct balance with respect to the digest D, right? And now what the miner can do is, well, he has the digest, he has the proof, and he has the balance. He can verify that user one has $65. And if he does, he can then transfer $5 to user two. But how does he do that? Because the miner needs to update this digest D into a new D prime. Well, some vector commitment schemes support such homomorphic updates, let's call them, where you can directly apply the update to the digest if you know the change. So the miner takes the change by minus $5 to user one and applies it to D, and the change by plus $5 to user two and applies it to D and obtains this D prime. And the other thing that has to happen here is these proofs were only valid with respect to D and they won't be valid with respect to D prime. So once you change something in the Merkle tree, all other proofs will be invalid. So you have to update all proofs. And a lot of VC schemes support this. Each user would have to sort of pick up this transaction from the network. Pick up this transaction from the network and apply the update to its own proof. And that can be a bit cumbersome for the user because users have to keep up with all transactions in the network. So what CPZ 18 proposes is that, well, if users want to, they can choose to do that update locally. But an alternative is to have proof serving nodes that maintain all of these proofs. And in fact, proof serving nodes can be sharded. They don't have to maintain all proofs. They can maintain a shard of the proofs. And a user can just contact a node and get its latest updated proof. And now just the proof serving nodes themselves have to keep up with all transactions and apply the updates to the proofs. So roughly speaking, this is the stateless validation framework proposed by RMCI and CPZ 18. And there's a natural question here, why do this at all? The biggest piece of motivation is to obviate state transfer in sharded consensus. This is something that the Ethereum folks are really interested in doing for the next generation of Ethereum. So in sharded consensus protocol, the state has to be transferred when a replica switches shards. And this state that I described in the earlier slide is split up in multiple shards. And when I have a replica in shard 1 switching to shard 2, it has to download the vector for shard 2, which sort of slows down these protocols to some extent. The other reason is, well, you have these peer-to-peer nodes that are trying to join the system and they have to download this full vector, and that's kind of a barrier to entry. It would be nice to lower that. And then in the past, cryptocurrencies like Ethereum have had denial of service attacks precisely because the state was stored on disk and some bugs affected how fast the disk reads were. But I think really what I find really compelling is that this is kind of how you want a distributed system to work. Like a distributed system should distribute everything, including the storage. So in my opinion, like if I look at this slide, I see a distributed system where nobody stores the full state. So I see every user stores its own proof, or proof serving nodes store a subset of the proofs. Miners only store a 16th digest. So if you ask me, I think it's kind of cool. We actually get a fully distributed system in this way, where nobody has to store the full state.
But you, like one quick question. Yeah, I agree that this would be like very nice in the ideal world, but you still would need to make sure that all proofs are somehow available, right?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So because if some of these get lost, then you're in trouble.
Oh yes, yes. So remember, in principle, each user can always compute its proof by just processing the blockchain from point 0 when it started to point n, the latest block. So in terms of availability, you can always do that. Now, in terms of efficiency, do you want to do that?
Yeah. Okay.
And the answer might be no. And if you don't, you should rely on these proof serving nodes. And then there's another interesting question there. Well, okay, man, but now you've introduced these proof serving nodes. How are you going to incentivize them to operate? And we actually have an answer to that question too, but I won't talk about that in this presentation.
Yeah.
Okay. I have questions. But for the state commitments that you're talking about, do you still need this append-only property for keeping track of balances?
Yeah, so as far as I can tell, you do not, because actually it's not append-only, right? So if you look at the state transition here, this is not an append-only change to the vector. The vector position actually changed by -5 here and by +5 here. So this is not an append-only block.
Okay. So what
and the vector
does this scheme confer for stateless validation?
What advantages does this scheme confer for stateless validation? By this scheme, you mean this is just a framework that can use any vector commitment scheme. Let me make sure I understand your question.
Oh, sorry, I just mean your AAD.
The AAD has nothing to do with this. The AAD was part 1 of the talk. It was for transparency logs. This is part 2 of the talk. We're talking about stateless validations, and we're going to talk about VC schemes that are used for stateless validations. And we have 2 constructions that I want to talk about. But AADs are not helpful for this.
Okay.
Yes. So sorry, that wasn't clear. It's a good question you're raising. Yeah, so AADs are just for transparency logs. This is a different application. It requires VCs, and not just any VCs, VCs that support efficient proof updates and efficient digest updates. And I'll talk about that in a second. So let's get to that. What do you need from the VC scheme in order to do the stateless validation? you need updatable proofs because users need to process these transactions to update their own proofs in case, let's say, there's an attack on proof serving nodes and you can't fetch your proof from them. And you need updatable digest because a miner has to do that transition from D to D prime by applying the changes in the transactions that they processed. And Merkle hash trees can, in principle, update proofs and digests, but to do so, they require dynamic extra info. So for example, if position J in the vector changed, in order for me to update the miner, I not only need to know by how much position J changed, but I also need to have a proof for position J with respect to the old digest in order to update the new digest and in order to update my proof. And this is not inherently problematic, but it does add extra communication to the system and extra interaction to the system, because when Alice sends money to Bob, she not only has to include her proof in the transaction, she also has to include Bob's proof for the miner to actually do that update. So it'd be really nice to do these updates without dynamic auxiliary info. Static auxiliary info would be perfect, for example. And finally, well, we also need aggregation for proofs because we have a bunch of transactions. Each transaction has their own proof, pi I, with respect to the digest D in the current block. And that adds a lot of overhead to the block. So it would be really nice to aggregate it. This can be done in Merkle hash trees using snarks in principle, but it's not efficient. And lastly, if we're going to have these proof serving nodes, well, they have to have a way of pre-computing all proofs fast. And of course, we want concrete efficiency. Now, in previous VC schemes, Cepurnoi et al. Built a VC scheme from multivariate polynomial commitments. And they have block size proofs, just like Merkle hash trees, that are very concretely efficient in practice, also 32 bytes per sibling node. But they don't support aggregation and they don't support proof precomputation. And there's a bunch of VCs from RSA assumptions that have constant size proofs, and they support proof aggregation and they support proof recomputation. So they kind of meet all of our requirements, but some of these schemes require this dynamic auxiliary info to do the updates. And some don't, but either way, they are less concretely efficient than we want them to be because they use RSA groups, proofs are big, exponentiations are more expensive. So the question is, can we improve on the state of the art? And I'll give you sort of the 2 steps that we take to do that. So we build vector commitments from univariate polynomial commitments, or KZG commitments, and we obtain concretely efficient vector commitments in 2 steps. So the first step is we build a new data structure called the Authenticated Multi-Point Evaluation Tree. This is a mouthful, so we call it an AMT, and it has lock size proof and doesn't support aggregation. This is basically the equivalent of the CPZ18 construction, but from univariate rather than multivariate polynomials. However, it does have a way to pre-compute all proofs efficiently, and it can reuse existing QSDH public parameters that are already out there generated for snark systems. So that's one advantage of this scheme. And it's also useful for other applications, which are independent of this talk. In step 2, we noticed that actually we looked at this AMT scheme a little bit, and all of a sudden we realized that it actually has constant sized aggregatable proofs if you squint your eyes right. And similar to the RSA-based constructions. But unlike the RSA-based constructions, it's much more efficient because it only uses pairing-friendly elliptic curves. And as a compromise, though, it does require these order n size public parameters, but you can reuse existing parameters. And furthermore, it also supports pre-computing all proofs efficiently. And the key ideas behind these 2 constructions are to represent a vector as a polynomial phi, where phi of I is equal to vi for all positions vi in the vector v. And then you can commit to the polynomial using the KZG scheme, which I won't explain how it works, but you get a constant size 32-byte commitment. And then you can compute these KZG proofs for each phi of I. So you can prove that phi of I is equal to vi with respect to the commitment of phi. And really the challenge is that computing these proofs is too slow to do for all points I. If you have n points, you have to spend n squared time to compute all proofs if you do it naively. And that's one of the challenges that we tackle in our work. And lastly, to do updates without dynamic info, with static info instead, we leverage this Lagrange representation of these polynomials. And this is just, I'm this is very broadly speaking, and I won't go into details about how this works too much. It might not mean anything to some of you, but for details, you can see again our slides and our other presentations where I go into a lot of technical math to explain how this works. Now, I do want to explain how our AMT construction works because I actually really like it. And the idea is that we take our polynomial phi, which represents the vector, and let's say the vector has 4 positions, 1 through 4, and we want to compute proofs for all of these 4 positions. And if we did it naively, it would be too slow when n is large. So what we do instead is we define a recursive way of computing all proofs via a polynomial multi-point evaluation. So the idea is I take phi and I divide it by this accumulator polynomial over all of the points I'm trying to compute proofs for. And I get a quotient and a remainder, as I always do when I divide 2 polynomials. And then I repeat recursively. I take the left half of the accumulator and I divide R14 by it. And I take the right half and I divide R14 by it. And now I get R14 divided by this, R14 divided by that. I get new quotient, new remainder, new quotient, new remainder. And then I repeat recursively with this accumulator and this remainder, this accumulator and this remainder. And in the leaves, actually what I get are the evaluations themselves. So this is an algorithm from 1972 by Moink and Borodin. Now, the intuition behind why you get the evaluations is if you look at what you're doing here, you're taking phi modulo this and you're getting a remainder. Then you're taking that remainder modulo this, you're getting another remainder. And you're taking this remainder modulo x minus 1. Well, really what you're doing is you're computing phi modulo x minus 1 in a really indirect fashion. And phi modulo x minus 1 by definition is phi of 1. So that's what gives you the evaluations in the leaves. And you can compute this in n log squared n time. And if you're careful about how you choose these points, you can also do it in n log n time. And next, what we do is we commit to the quotients in this tree using the KZG commitment scheme. So this looks like a quotient polynomial evaluated at a trapdoor tau, and you raise G to that. Again, I'm not going to go into details how that works, but it's a 32-byte commitment at each node. And I can compute this commitment in n log n time, and I get an AMT that way. And a proof for a position in this tree, so if I want to prove that the third thing in the vector is phi of 3, or V3, I only need to give you these quotients along the path to 3. It's order log n sized, and it takes order log n pairings or bilinear maps to verify. And I won't go into details about how that works. And that's our AMT construction, and it allows us to compute all n proofs in n log n time. So we have an improvement from n squared to n log n time, but we do increase the proof size. Initially, KZG proofs were constant size. Now we are logarithmic sized proofs. And that covers the proof computation. What about updatability? If I want to update the vector commitment after a change at position J, this VC implemented using the AMTs, then I will only need the static auxiliary info to do so. And we call this an update key. And the static auxiliary info is just a commitment to a Lagrange polynomial LJ. Again, I won't define this, but some of you already know what this means. So if I have the commitment to Lagrange polynomial LJ, I can update the digest very easily. This commitment is static, it never changes. And if I want to update proofs, I will also need an AMT proof for LJ of X at the point X is equal to J. So LJ of J will always be equal to 1 if you know how Lagrange polynomials work. And if I have this AMT proof, which is log n size and it's static, I can update all proofs. And as intuition, the idea is that AMTs are actually homomorphic. So if I have an AMT for phi and an AMT for LJ of X, I can combine them homomorphically. And that's what allows me to update proofs. And that's all I'm going to say about update proofs and digest. I know it's not very, very satisfying in terms of technical detail, but again, I defer to my other presentations. And next, now, Philip, when should we end this? Because I only have 5 minutes left, it seems.
Yeah, so how long would the regular talk?
I'm ready. I can present this very quickly and I can conclude, I think.
Yeah, then let's aim for that. Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah, I was prepared to do that in terms of slides. Okay,
great.
Right, so finally, I want to talk to you about how we improve AMTs to have constant sized proofs. And our collaborators, Tankrat Feist and Dmitry Kovratovic, have a technique for computing constant sized KZG proofs in n log n time, whereas the AMT technique computed log n sized proofs in n log n time. So this technique is just simply better. It computes smaller proofs. It is slower than AMTs, but that can be a price worth paying. And we use this technique to compute the constant size proofs. And the next thing we have to do is figure out how to aggregate them. And the idea is to use partial fraction decomposition, which roughly speaking allows you to take a linear combinations of two fractions like this with some constant coefficients and obtain this fraction, which multiplies the things in the denominator. And if you look at how KZG proofs work, if I have a KZG proof or a VC proof for position I in the vector, it's actually just the polynomial phi divided by x minus I. And you commit to that quotient of the division, which is what this double thing indicates. And the proof for J is, again, the polynomial phi divided by x minus J, and you commit to that. And the proof for pi ij is actually phi divided by the product of these two things in the denominator. So it turns out that if we take a linear combination of these two proofs using the same coefficients we would use here, we actually can aggregate the proof. And this applies not just to two proofs, but to any number of proofs. And again, we go into much more details in the paper and in our other presentations about how this works. And in terms of updates, updates are very similar. You only need static update keys, the commitment to the Lagrange polynomial LJ as before. And to update a proof after position J changed, you have to reason about which proof you're updating. So if you're updating I different than J, then you need a KZG proof for the Lagrange polynomial LJ evaluating to 0 at point I. One of our main contributions is that we give a way to compute this proof from the commitments to Li and Lj in constant time using, again, partial fraction decomposition. And if I is equal to J, then you have to use a KZG proof for Lj of J being equal to 1. And that's that. So again, to conclude this part of the presentations, what I was trying to say is that Merkle hash trees are not ideal for stateless validation because they don't support aggregation and they require dynamic auxiliary information to do the updates. And we give a first construction called AMTs, which you can think of as algebraic Merkle trees that support updates with static info and also support pre-computing all proofs, just like Merkle hash trees, but not like the CPZ VC. And it can reuse existing public parameters. And then we improve upon this by making its proofs constant size and aggregatable while maintaining the easy updatability and the reusing of the parameters and the proof pre-computation, which, by the way, I didn't go into in details. And this is more efficient than the RSA-based versions of the scheme. And I also want to say that there's some other similar work that builds VCs from bilinear pairings from different assumptions. The point proof paper by Gorbunov et al. In the newest CCS. So please check that out as well. And you can see our paper for how we compare to their construction. And now, time permitting, I was going to go into our latest ePrint about stateless validation for smart contracts, but I can't do that due to time. So let me just conclude. So I think it's an exciting time to be doing authenticated data structures. There's a bunch of cool applications that require more than Merkle hash trees. And I think there's some interesting open problems to work on. So one thing is, can we make these AADs faster? I believe the answer is yes. It's just a matter of time and energy. Can we build better Merkle hash trees that support aggregating proofs? So AMTs and CPZ VCs were one attempt of that. It's very interesting to figure out if we can do aggregation in these constructions. Can we remove the need for these update keys altogether in our VCs and in our RSA authenticated dictionary, which I didn't have time to present? And actually, the answer seems to be tentatively yes. And there's a new paper on this in Asia Crypt 2020 that does this for a authenticated dictionary similar to ours. So please check that out. It's actually a very cool construction. And if we can remove these update keys, that would also further improve communication and storage and stateless validation. Can we do incremental aggregation and disaggregation in pairing-based VCs? I didn't really talk about what incrementality means, but so far aggregation is one shot, which means you do it, you get the aggregated proof, and you can no longer aggregate other things in, whereas incrementally you could, but that doesn't seem to be possible in these pairing-based VCs. It only seems to be possible in RSA-based VCs. And finally, I want to mention other exciting authenticated dictionary work. There's a paper by Derek Lung, which builds dictionaries from vector commitments. And there's a blog post by Dankarat Feist, which builds authenticated dictionaries from KZG commitments. So please check that out. And with that, I thank you all. if you want more technical details, please check out my website. All of these constructions are handled in depth, and I did give a recent talk on the newest construction, which I didn't have time to talk about. And I want to thank all of my collaborators with that, and I'm open for questions if there's time.
Great. So yeah, that was amazing. Thanks a lot, Alin.
Thank you, Philip.
Yeah, although we're like at the time that the session is ending, I think we can still take 1 or 2 quick questions if anybody has anything.
Yeah, we did start 5 minutes late.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so with
please.
the stateless validation use case, like, do you have any like benchmarks to compare with if you do stateless validation with just standard like Merkle state commitments using a Merkle proof, like a sparse Merkle tree, and just use like not aggregatable updates compared to do stateless validation with aggregatable updates? Like, how much of a let's say, for example, with standard Ethereum block, how much of a bandwidth improvement would that give you? Because my understanding is with stateless validation, you still need to download the state for that specific block that's being updated.
Yeah, so with stateless validation for smart contracts, I think you're talking about, right?
Well, or just in general,
particular,
just
because with payments, with payments like in the transaction, you only need to include this balance and this proof compared to a normal transaction. But with smart contracts, when you do a stateless transaction for a smart contract, you have to include all of the memory locations being read by the smart contract execution and you have to put those in the transaction, and you have to put a proof for those reads. And I thought that's what you were trying to touch upon. Am I misunderstanding your question?
Well, I was just talking about it in general, but I guess what you're saying is that for smart contracts, aggregatable commitments give you more, I guess, or less. No, sorry, less of a bandwidth change in terms of, or less of a cost, less of a bandwidth cost. In the sense that
yes, in the sense that you get all of this overhead from including the memory reads in the transaction, and you have to include those in the block too, which normally in stateful validation you wouldn't have to. So there's no exploration of the trade-offs here, and I think you're really touching upon a very important topic for future research. Like, what are the trade-offs when you start doing this, and what do you see in practice? Also, in terms of verifying proofs, so remember, a miner has to verify this proof, right? So if this is a pairing-based vector commitment scheme, we're talking about doing bilinear maps. So that's going to be expensive. And at what point does that start making sense? Because maybe going to disk, some will argue that it can be expensive too as the system scales over time, but usually those systems can be optimized in various ways. So why is it worth doing this in practice? And I think, the Ethereum folks, I think are sort of very worried about state transfer and sharded consensus, which is why they want to eliminate the state to speed up the consensus itself. Also, there's reason to believe that when you do these consensus protocols, most of the time is spent in the execution rather than the consensus part. And if you can speed up the execution using stateless validation by avoiding going to disk, then you might see a speed up too. So I'm just going to broadly say that it still remains to be seen and practically explored what the implications of this will be. And I think it's very interesting. And I haven't done this myself because I'm not a consensus guy, and it's such a big effort to try and implement all of this in practice in a consensus protocol and meaningfully explore it. But I hope people do, and certainly it seems like the Ethereum folks might be likely to do it. So we'll have an answer at some point.
Okay.
I hope that answers your questions.
Yeah. Any other questions? No? Okay, so then I guess let's wrap up. Again, Alin, thanks a lot. This was really great.
Thank you, Philip.
Yeah, with that, I'm stopping the recording now.